It's time for the Big Three. In today's topics, what are U.S. options, slur ban, and this week's must-read. So let's bring in my Big Three panel. Columnist with the Chicago Defender and professor of political science at Hiram College, Jason Johnson. MSNBC.com managing editor, Dafna Linzer. And Republican strategist, Joe Watkins. And with a welcome to you all, we'll go ladies first here to you, Dafna. So let's go first to Ukraine, and let's take a listen to Secretary of State John Kerry on Meet the Press. Here's that.
President Obama hopes that President Putin will turn in the direction that is available to him to work with all of us in a way that creates stability in Ukraine. This does not have to be and should not be an East-West struggle. This is not about Russia and the U.S. This is about the people of Ukraine.
Your reaction to that, Dafna?
I think that's a message that John Kerry's been trying to emphasize all week. He did it in his interview with Andrea Mitchell, this idea that, this isn't going to be a return to the Cold War. Right now, it doesn't look very good, and it certainly is looking that way. I think that if there wasn't this push a little bit towards democracy and the West having some impact in Ukraine, I don't think we would see this. But I think that the way Putin is behaving certainly makes us feel like it's the Cold War all over again.
Yeah, Jason, this is another foreign policy challenge for President Obama. Understandably, he's been loath to get militarily involved anywhere. How does this set him up for this challenge?
It doesn't set him up very well at all, because there's very little we can do. Look, we're not going head-to-head with the Russians. Those days are long gone. We can't afford it. They don't have the resources. We don't have the resources. So the only thing we can do is try to squeeze Russia to change their opinion economically by getting the rest of the EU involved. And that's probably not going to work. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to see this from Putin for a while. It's just like with Chechnya. It's just like with Georgia. This is a weakened empire, and they're trying to assert their influence. Not much we can do.
And Joe, the White House says, though, despite what Jason has just said, it is suspending its upcoming participation in all, certainly the preparatory meetings for June's G8 summit there in Sochi, Russia. What do you make of the U.S. response so far, and the fact that Canada, Britain, and France have also said, okay, we're going to suspend prep for that as well?
Well, I think that's the right thing to do. I think that you have to show, the U.S. has to show that it supports the people of the Ukraine, and that's the right thing to do. I agree with what Jason said, that we don't have a lot of options. The president doesn't have lots of options or lots of leverage in this case, because consider the fact that this is not just about the U.S. and Russia, and even if it was, Russia only accounts for about 2% of our trade with the U.S., so they're not a huge trade partner. And then we have to consider the fact that most of Europe still relies heavily on Russian gas. So really having the leverage that we might need to force Putin's hand is going to be hard to find.
Do you see anything with any teeth in terms of leverage, Dafna?
I do. I think that there are sanctions. I do think that the U.S. supplying energy in places in Europe instead of Russia is a good thing. I think there's a price to be paid here. I think that there is a toll, and I think that you can find all kinds of means, including the G8 summit, including other kinds of things where, where Putin wants to be the host, wants to be in charge, wants to be an equal among world powers, to say, hey, wait a minute, it's not going to be as easy as you think.
Okay, guys, let's switch gears. This next topic has been getting tons of attention. It's the NFL considering a new rule banning players from using racial slurs on the field, or they might suffer a 15-yard penalty. I spoke earlier this weekend with former Congressman J.C. Watts, who certainly played in the Canadian Football League after playing as a quarterback at University of Oklahoma. Here's that.
I'm old enough to understand the scourge of racial slurs, but I'm also young enough to kind of understand the new culture and how the new culture works and what they say and what they do, but it still doesn't make it right. I think it will raise the conscience level, but it's a broader discussion, I think, that needs to be had.
Okay, so this proposed ban, Jason, would you support it?
No, it's ridiculous. First off, it's hypocritical for a league that's going to penalize you for using the N-word. You got a team called the Redskins. But even if you look deeper than that, you can't stop people from using inappropriate language unless you already have rules in place, but they already happen to have rules in place. You can't cuss at referees. You can't cuss at other players. So I think this is really something from the Fritz Pollard Committee. It's a bunch of the older generation trying to play the Bill Cosby scold to us young people. I think it's a waste of time, and I wouldn't support it.
Okay. There you go. We're unequivocal on that one. Joe, the critics, we have this proposed rule saying that this would be a majority of white owners and refs telling predominantly African-American players how to use a word that they have claimed, and it's not necessarily, in their minds, being used in a derogatory way between each other. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, in a perfect world, we want people to treat each other the way they would want to be treated, and nobody wants to be treated poorly. But at the same time, as somebody who played sports on the varsity level, I know that half the game is not just physical, but it's psychological, and sometimes opponents will use anything they can to get inside the skin of their opponent. So if the NFL does impose this ban, there's just going to be a lot of 15-yard penalties that are going to be shuttled around back and forth. I don't think that players are going to pay it a lot of attention.
Jason, are you laughing and shaking your head as you're listening to Joe?
Yeah, because it's ridiculous. I mean, look, there's a lot of foul things that are said in the locker room. And I mean, even with women's sports, this is not just a gender thing. I think the NFL is really wasting their time by getting involved in this.
Dafna, what do you think would be the biggest challenge to implementing a rule like this if the NFL doesn't listen to Jason and adopts it?
Oh, I think there's going to be a lot of challenges. But, you know, I think, you know, it does remind me a little bit about the Redskins. And it's kind of a measure of the times and the period that we're in, and a different kind of sense from people about what's acceptable and what isn't. And you know, the conversation that's been going on in this country, you know, a bigger one, a broader one about the Redskins, these are important, and they really are sort of a measure of the period that we're in right now. And they're important to people, even if it does seem sort of ridiculous.
Well, it's important and it is interesting, I will say that. As is this coming up, everyone, one of today's must-reads about the Oscars, maybe a real eye-opener, and that's next.